got a lot of people here. It's one mic between two, I gather, and I'm told the mics just work. You just pick up and speak, and don't worry about turning them on. We've covered a lot of ground this morning in terms of different aspects of the theme, this of designing the modern metro, and I think it's applicable both as if you look at the overall. What is a modern metro? It's not just new greenfield metros. It's modernising old ones and creating a template. And the question that springs to mind, and I'm going to throw this open to everybody or anybody to answer, is we're seeing things like standardised elements of kit. We've talked. Everybody's after reliability. There's the cost question, value for money, and everybody talks about benchmarking. Are we actually going to see a convergence in design? People going away from bespoke metros for individual cities, so we can actually sort of roll out clone metros across the world using the same building blocks to address the same problems. Anybody want to kick off on that as an idea? David, do you want to?
Thanks.
Yes, pick it up and talk to it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the answer has got to be yes. Then you look at what stops you getting to the yes, and it's around there are what I call application-specific areas that will always be different. So we've got deep, narrow tunnels that most things don't fit into. There's electromagnetic compatibility, which is always an issue, for example. But those are not fundamental barriers to more standardization. I think increasingly we're seeing suppliers using the same subcomponents, so traction packages, train management systems, etc. that they've developed elsewhere. But for some reason, which I've yet to fathom, even if something's been in use elsewhere, when you bring it to your railway, it always ends up failing. And that's what I don't understand. And then people tell you, we've never seen that before, we've never seen that before. So I think there are still some areas we need to get true standardization of something that absolutely works time and time again. Then our mantra is don't change it, unless you have to make it fit or fit some kind of EMC envelope, don't change it. But in short, the answer is I think we have to. We can't afford to just keep bespoking.
Right. Anybody else like to comment on that one? Carl?
I think it would be easier with newer system, but existing system, we all have our own standard. And the thing is, if I have to make a choice for a new signaling system, I'll pay that much amount of money for my system or that much amount of money for a standardized system. I will keep the other one. So a standardized, you have to go through that, but it will come through newest metro.
Gary?
I think we already see it, some in the contactless fare card systems as we migrate toward an open architecture in being able to use the MasterCard, Visa. Certainly we're not quite there yet, but we're getting to that point very quickly where you'll be able to use that all over the world. Also, sometimes you learn from history, as we've all talked about. The PCC cars in the United States was one of the more successful standardization programs as many systems migrated toward the PCC car, and then we got away from it. Now, of course, we all want our special cars individually designed. It costs us a lot more money that way, and I guess we like it because we continue to do it. But I think, as we've heard, we've got to get to a standardization program on multiple levels for us to all continue to remain viable and sustainable.
Okay. Jeremy, MTR's got a variety of different metros, and you're going out to other cities. You're developing your sort of outside consultancy and operations and management business. Are you taking best practice with you and delivering it? Is that part of your role?
Yes, we are. And I think the other thing that, as we're all referring to in different ways, is the internalisation of the manufacturing base. Increasingly, manufacturers are manufacturing where they see the greatest global advantage themselves. So we're all procuring from a wider and wider international base. We're all achieving cost efficiency through that, but that is also another driver to standardisation.
Yes. Johan, you haven't spoken yet. You're procuring new signalling for Stockholm for the Red Line. Is that buying off the shelf, or is it a bespoke application?
It's very much buying off the shelves and using standard as much as possible. And also when we buy new cars, we try to specify functions and then let the industry design the special details.
Mm-hmm. Okay, functional specifications. Gilbert.
I agree with him that in a new system is easier than an old system. Mm-hmm. For instance, before we buy our new trains, we try to have old trains for other companies. It's quite impossible to have equipment similar. So if in the future we will think about before, talk with other companies, I think it's easier than do with the old systems. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think for existing railways coming around for refit, the whole migration strategy, the long life vision is going to be a challenge for everybody. Yes, we can see the long-term objective, but how do you get there? Do you make the jump in one move, or do you make it in a series of steps? David.
Just one thing I was going to add. I mean, standardisation is a very broad term, but I certainly agree with some of the people here that subsystems is where to start. Yeah. Because trains effectively, I mean, it's a rolling stock discussion, but it applies elsewhere. Trains are made of a load of subsystems. Mm-hmm. So why you couldn't start from the standardized door subsystem that works reliably? You know, I still find everybody kind of invents their own around the world. Clients should have standardized specifications. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we work to one common spec that we get closer and closer? That would drive cost. And also we should have standardized operating procedures. Even when we buy systems today, the degraded modes are all called different things. You know, one person calls it PM, one person calls it RM. It's just amazing how bespoke we are. And certainly through Comet, we're trying to at least get the owners to think about more describing things in the same way. That would be a good start. So standardization starts with small things, I think, before we get to the big things. Yeah.
Yes, you're buying your new cars for Warsaw are a standard modular design from one of the manufacturers. Have you been able to take that design as a concept, or have you adapted it for your own requirements?
Yes, 2 years ago we signed a contract with our supplier, Siemens Consortium, and I think that I am sure that we will have good modern metro. And the question is, what is this modern metro? I think the modern metro, it is results of the balance between needs of the customer, our passengers, and our point of view, our operator point of view. Mm-hmm. And for example, in our new trains, new future train Inspiro, I think the first element, the first element, there is interoperability with our old facilities, because in our company we are using at this moment 3 types of rolling stock. The first of them, it is in the past the gift from our big brother, and next also gift, and we should pay. And third type, it is modern. It is from Alstom company, and every time, every moment, we evaluate the cost of the maintenance. It is very important for us, and as I said, and also my colleagues, the economical aspect is very, very important. Of course, firstly, it is the passenger needs.
Yeah. You mentioned there the phrase design for maintenance. Something that David was getting at in his presentation, reliability, and I put it down here actually. Design for maintenance operations. We talk about standardizing subsystems, but does that go for plug and play as well? So your standardized subsystems are designed to be easily get-atable, instantly replaceable, preferably bulletproof as well. Yeah.
Yes, I think that, I mean, our vision is towards a zero prep type of asset where it requires fewer and fewer people to maintain it, because that's the way the modern world is going anyway. You know, it's cars these days, you know, you tend not to look at them, and they tell you if things are going wrong. You don't sort of take them apart, you know, you don't take your TV set apart. So I think modern equipment should be very much black box, take things out using the diagnostic power to get you where it needs to get to. And again, if we can standardise the plug-and-play components, the interchangeability discussion that's started to happen now, I think clients will want stuff that's interchangeable because they may not want to be locked into necessarily very, very long term. You know, I think with railways, our assets last for a long time. Decisions you take live with you for 50 years. It's a very long time. And I don't think people want necessarily locked into those long-term arrangements. They want the ability to plug and play. But that goes to the procurement strategy, the specification. It's a big discussion.
Yeah, that kind of, we can see the evolution of like the technical elements, and if there's anything that's even longer life than the rolling stock, it's the stations. And a couple of people, Lorenzo, we haven't come to you yet, but you were talking about the sort of consultation, the evolution of the next generation station. And Gary touched on it a little bit with the consultation with the local people about design elements and fitting the stations into the local requirements and things. Is that something else where you've got standard practices, standard visions, passenger flow modelling, basic requirements, elements of the station that can also be replicated from one network to another?
Yes, we dream about standardization, the same station everywhere.
But then you get confused where you are.
But it's very difficult because, the geology is very different.
No.
So the people doing the civil engineering are imagining two tunnels, one tunnel very deep or overground sometimes. So as you see, a station overground cannot be the same than underground.
Sure.
But what you have to choose is what can be the same for the lights, for the ground, for the technical systems, the security systems. All that can be designed or chosen together. And if you are doing 10 or 20 stations, not to have something different in each station. It's very important, not only for buying them, but for the maintenance. People of our maintenance, they hate when architects are changing what is in the wall, for instance. The ties, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caro. I have a very good translator. A bilingual Canadian, so it's very easy for me. So but the architect doesn't want to put the same in any station. And even the customer doesn't want, because if all the stations are the same, it can be very boring. It can be also very confusing, because, for instance, in Paris, we have a lot of stations very similar and in the style of the beginning of the 20th century. But people now, they cannot see that the station is different. So we have to find this compromise between something with the same for good reasons, and to adapt to the geography. Also, the towns in the suburbs doesn't want to have the same than in Paris, and it doesn't want to have the same than another town, because they are different. They have their personality. Yeah.
I will admit, in the past, I've managed to get off at the wrong station where they've been identical buildings and they look exactly the same. So it's technical harmonisation, common components, but a localized look. Would you buy that, Gary?
Sure. You know, the localized look, and that's when I was talking about the art and design components. We have very standard features on our stations, as you know, Chris, you've seen them. So we have standard components. The design components are very, very similar to one another. So on one hand, you could argue that it could get boring from one station to the other. The other perspective is, though, it's very identifiable for the consumer, the public, to try to find a station. If they're looking for a station and they can't find it, then they know what to look for. Every station is going to be very similar. Where it becomes different is the color scheme, the tiles, the patterns, the art. That's where we try to differentiate our stations and try to draw the community into them and integrate the community with that. But the components, the design components, are very similar from one station to the other.
Anybody else want to comment on that one? David's back again.
I could say that Stockholm is an old system. It was built in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. And especially the stations that were built in the 70s are pieces of art. The total station is a piece of art. And it's a nice place to be in, but it's expensive to maintain. So nowadays we are looking in other ways to build stations. But still we are not building very many new stations. No. Just retrofitting the ones that we have mainly. And then we try to use more sustainable art pieces that are easier to maintain. Yeah. But still we integrate art in every station.
Yeah, that's good. David, you wanted to?
I was going to say, the one thing that is missing from discussion is that the reality is that we're all going to be under huge cost pressure going forward, and that will drive, whether we like it or not, common procurement practices, common specifications, open standards, because you've got to look at other industries. That's how they drive costs down, and we can no longer afford to just all be doing our own thing, even if we wanted to. So it's just going to force this huge standardization, but it starts from the clients deciding what they want, talking to other clients, trying to get bigger numbers, better specifications, and open standards, I think, are going to be important, where people can just plug and play.
That's very much right. It's a message we've been plugging in Metro Report probably for the last decade or more. It's coming from the supply industry saying, you know, if you buy our standard products, we can sell them to you cheaper. But the message hasn't up to now been getting through to the customers. And now I think it's finally the cities are recognising or being told by the professionals that yes, you can go for your bespoke design, but you can't afford it. You've got to consolidate. Well, I've probably had my share of the questions. I'm sure there must be people out here. We've got a couple of minutes left before lunch. Does anybody like to throw in a quick question? We have one down at the back over here. There's a microphone coming.
Yes, you have mentioned previously the automotive industry. And in the automotive industry, it is true that the automobile is more reliable, the maintenance is much easier, it's auto-detect automatically when you have to maintain, it's more and more plug and play, etc., etc. And this is what you are looking for in the railway industry. However, there's one difference which I hear there, which is I want the train, the rolling stock, to last longer. It was 30 years, now I want it 50 years. And there is a and which is not the case of the automotive industry. Our car lasts much shorter time than before. So I would like to understand why do you make such a big difference and why do you insist so much on the length and the durations of the equipment that you purchase?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else can answer if they want. I said in my presentation that I think this is where I talked about the optimal whole of life. And frankly, if there's a discussion to be had with the supply industry around it's going to be overall cheaper to replace this thing every 20 years, that's a discussion we'll have. There's no dogma about a train necessarily lasting for 40 years, except it's so expensive. You know, it's all we can afford to replace our fleets because we have 5,000 cars on the network. We can't be replacing them every 5 years. We just can't do it. However, if the cost was such and the migration was such, we could look at shorter periods. I mean, a typical life of a car is 13 years in this country. So it is much shorter, and I know they're coming down. But it's something that we're up for. It's this whole of life cost all the time.
Whole of life cost. Carl.
I agree with you. It's because it's so expensive. And if you do any calculation, and we did it, and right now we're thinking about the second train to make it last 60 years, you cannot justify to replace a train on money. It's too expensive. And it's easier to maintain in our place. It costs me $40,000 a year to maintain it, and many million to buy it. So it's a business case.
Yeah. Jeremy.
There's an interesting comparison between the cost of purchasing a motorway-going executive coach that's capable of doing 120, 140 kilometres an hour on a motorway. If you're a coach operator, you'd be able to buy that for about £150,000. That's about a tenth of the price of buying a diesel traction packaged, air-conditioned DMU to go on railway at about the same speed, but with a very different life expectancy. I think it's a very interesting question, actually, for the industry.
Yeah, that's right. As just looking back about 20 years, the East Japan Railway actually sort of got into a discussion with its supply chain about the half-life, half-cost train. And so design expectations changed the life. Let's go for a half-life train and half the cost. Well, they achieved the half-life train, but they didn't achieve half the cost. So they've gone away from that concept. Hubert, you wanted to comment?
No, I believe when you talk about a train lived for, I don't know, 50 years, 60 years, we're really talking about the car body.
Yeah.
But the subcomponents, you must change. And it's cheaper than try to maintain it for how long this time.
Yeah. Yeah, so the interior gets refitted for passenger expectations, the seats wear out. You can change the technical systems as well, but
yes, to modernize them.
But these days the money is going to be in the systems and not so much in the car body, isn't it?
Yes, but it's cheaper to do this than try to maintain a so old system.
And of course, the other big difference from the automotive industry is that the automotive industry is churning out 500 million identical vehicles straight off the production line, whereas even the biggest rolling stock order is 1,500 cars. So is there any other questions? Anybody else at a point? Impossible. Okay. Well, if there's nobody else, nobody want to comment anymore, well, I think we'll draw the panel. I'm sure everybody's waiting for their lunch. So thank you all for hanging on. Can I thank my panelists very much?